Okay, so thank you very much, and thank you to Julien and Stéphane for organizing this meeting. And as Stéphane said, I encourage you to ask questions and to feel free to interrupt me as much as you want. I will try to answer questions if I can. Okay, so my topic will be about quantum eigenstates, and it will be I will try to describe their properties in what is called the semi-classical limit of quantum mechanics. So let me start by introducing the players of my talk. So I will look at what is called the Schrödinger equation. Okay, so this is this equation. And so you have IH dtu is equal to minus h squared over 2m Laplacian of u, and you fix some initial condition. And so I will not, in this talk, I will be interested in what is called the stationary modes of this equation. So, and I will try to describe their properties in terms of the geometry of the domain where I'm working on. So I will consider this equation on M. So M is a domain, so you can think, for instance, for a moment of, can be Rn, or Rd, I will use maybe D for the dimension, omega, some open set, or most of my talk, M will be a compact manifold, okay? But I will give examples, so. Okay, and the purpose of this morning's session is to try to explain to you how the properties of this equation is related to the geometry of M and to the classical dynamics on M, so meaning the Newton equations. Okay, so to make things more simple, I will just focus on the case of stationary modes. Okay, so the objective is to study stationary modes. Okay, so it means that I want to study solutions which are of this form, exponential minus it e over h u e of x. Okay, so if you plug this in this equation, you can see that okay, here you will have the Laplacian of ue, and when you differentiate with respect to time, you will have that minus h squared Laplacian of ue over 2m is equal to e u. Okay, so when I study the stationary modes of the Schrödinger equation, it is, at least the Schrödinger equation with no potential, it is equivalent to study Laplace eigenfunctions. Okay, and the goal of my talk is to study these eigenfunctions in the limit where the energy E tends to infinity. And so let me explain why. So the questions, so the general question is this, is how the properties of UE are affected by the geometry of M, so of the domain or the configuration space, by the geometry of the configuration space M. Okay, and more specifically, I want to study the influence of the classical dynamics associated to this problem. So here, more precisely, I want to see, I will explain this later, but to this Schrödinger equation is associated a classical Hamiltonian. So the Schrödinger equation here, Schrödinger equation is associated with this Hamiltonian with H, so which is a function from what is called C star of M. So let me explain this. So you take the space of, here it's the position of the particle, so it is an element position, x is in M, and psi is the impulsion. Okay, and you associate psi square. Okay, so I will come back to this later. And so to this equation is associated this classical Hamiltonian in a certain way. And what I want to explain is how this generates, so this is the energy of a classical particle, and I want to explain how the dynamical properties of this Hamiltonian equation, of the equations associated to this Hamiltonian function, influence the properties of the Laplace eigenfunctions. Okay, so, and I will discuss between what, let's say, chaotic and or integrable systems. So it is quite vague for a moment, but the principle is like this, is that in the limit, in the high energy limit, so in the limit where E tends to infinity, the properties of the classical evolution induced by H should emerge in the properties of the Laplace eigenfunction. Okay, so the classical dynamics associated with H, associated to H, should emerge in the properties of UE. Okay, so it means that depending on the geometry or depending on the fact that the classical flow is chaotic or not chaotic, for instance, the properties of this Laplace eigenfunction should be quite different. Okay, so for the rest of this morning, I will focus on this problem. So I will study this eigenfunction, and I will use what are called, let's say, semi-classical conventions. So I will set H square is equal to H square bar over 2ME. So it means that instead of looking at the limit where E tends to infinity, I will look at the limit where H goes to 0. Okay, so the problem for all this, all my lecture will be to study this equation. So minus H square Laplacian of UH is equal to UH, and I will take them normalized. Okay. Okay, so I want to study this equation, and I want to see how it depends on the geometry of M. So it will be to go, I will try to make this correspondence between classical and quantum mechanics, which is at the heart of this conference. Okay, so the goal is this. Okay, so it's to study this kind of equation and to understand the influence of the classical dynamics induced by this Hamiltonian function. Okay, but I will be more precise. It's just the rough picture for the moment. Okay, so let's. Yes.
So I would have guessed that E has only discrete values.
It depends if you are on a compact manifold, but I will say this in a minute.
When you have H, suddenly it's only one.
Is some H what?
I mean, this renormalization somehow. And now eigenvalues.
So you can think that it will.
Discrete values of H, right?
Yeah, it's a discrete values of H. But for the moment, I did not say anything about the fact that it is compact or not compact. But I will come to the fact that it is a discrete set in 1 minute. If you leave me 1 minute. So here it's in the end, it will be a discrete set of values. So it will be the Laplace eigenfunction, and it will be the inverse of the Laplace eigenvalue. In 1 minute, I answer the question more precisely. Okay, so let me. Okay, so let me start with the preliminary facts. So first, does there exist some solution to this equation? Okay, so this is the first question. Okay, so first, preliminary facts. Okay, so during all my talk, I will work on a compact manifold without boundaries. So I will give you example in a minute, so that if you are afraid of this, hopefully you will be less afraid after that. Okay, but in all my talk, I will work with MG, which is a compact manifold, which is a smooth, say C infinity, and without boundary. Okay, and the dimension of M, I will denote it by a D. Okay, so the example you can keep in mind for the moment is example 1 is the torus. So it's TD is equal to RD quotiented by 2 pi ZD. Okay, so it's so the fundamental domain is this, and you identify this thing with this thing, this side with this side, and this side with this side. Okay, 2 pi, and so it gives you a torus. Okay, so it's okay, and you have the other example I will use is the sphere, SD, or let's say S2 for a moment, is the set of points x, y, z in R3, such that x plus y squared plus z squared is equal to 1. Okay, so it's a sphere. Okay, so these are two examples of compact manifold, and here the metric is just the Euclidean metric, so it's a G is equal to dx1 squared plus dxd squared. And here the metric is you use in spherical coordinates, so okay, so here you have theta. Okay, so in spherical coordinates, it's, let me be sure that I use you have G is equal to d theta squared plus sine squared theta d phi squared. Okay, so this is just the metric which is induced by the Euclidean matrix on R3. It gives you this one. Okay, so these are two examples of compact manifold, and I want to study the Laplacian associated to this two manifold. Okay, so when you have this compact manifold, you can define the Laplacian. Okay, so Laplacian is the Laplacian associated with G. Okay, so in my two examples, it gives you on the torus, it's just the usual Laplacian. Okay, so delta G is the dx1 square plus dxd square. And on S2, okay, so I have to delta G is 1 over, so sine squared theta d phi square plus 1 over sine theta d theta sine theta. Okay, so every time you have this kind of object, so you have a metric on a manifold, you can define a Laplacian. And in my two examples, this is defined like this. Okay, so on the torus is the usual Laplacian that you know, except that it acts on a function which are periodic, which are 2 pi periodic. And here it's you take the Laplacian in this spherical coordinates and it gives you this. Okay, so it's just two examples that you can keep in mind. Okay, and so to answer your question, the fact is that under these assumptions, so under the compactness of the manifold here, there exists a discrete subset of eigenvalues. Okay, so fact, there exists 0, there exists a sequence of eigenvalues, lambda 2, lambda 3, lambda j, and there exists an orthonormal basis, psi j, j non-negative of L2, such that you have minus Laplacian of psi j is equal to lambda j squared psi j. Okay, and with my convention from before, lambda j squared is equal to hj minus 2. Okay, so if you are on a compact manifold, you have a discrete sequence of eigenvalues. So, and what we want to do is to study these eigenvalues in the limit where lambda j tends to infinity. Okay, so still on my example, you can see that on the torus, it's to take a Laplace eigenfunction, it just means to take a trigonometric polynomial. Okay, so example 1 still, m is equal to rd 2p cb. Okay, so you have that. If I write, so I denoted by 1, so minus h squared delta uh is equal to uh, and uh is normalized in L2. So if you take a Laplace eigenfunction, it just means that uh of x is a sum over some over lattice point in ZD, okay, such that h times the modulus of k is equal to 1 of c at k exponential ikx. Okay, you can see that this is the Laplace eigenfunction because when you differentiate twice, what? Where? This. So this you can.
Just don't put your hand.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so here if you have a Laplace eigenfunction, it means that you have a trigonometric polynomial, and this thing, when you differentiate it twice with the Laplacian, you see that what comes out is the modulus of k squared. Okay? So you can, and the normalization condition is that the sum of the ck squared is equal to 1. Okay? Norm of k h is equal to 1.
Can you say which measure you put on M?
Which, okay, so I put here on M, so on the torus it's just the usual Lebesgue measure. And here on M, so associated with my metric here, okay, so implicitly here, I use the volume measure induced by G. Okay, so what you have to think about is just that it is an absolutely, it's the Lebesgue measure, it's a Lebesgue measure, it's something which is absolutely continuous with respect to the Lebesgue measure, and the density is given by some determinant of the volume. Okay, so on the torus it's just the usual Lebesgue measure. On the sphere it's a sine square d theta d phi. It's what you think. Okay, so there is a natural way to put a Lebesgue measure.
So in this case, the norm of k is what we think it is.
So the norm of k, yes, sorry, norm of k square is the sum of the kj square with k is equal to k1 kt.
So h should be 1 over the integer.
H should be 1 over, yeah, so I put h times norm of k is equal to 1. Okay, so the eigenvalue is a norm of k square, if you want. It's just that I use this convention with h. Yes?
So I'm a little late in asking, but in the limit e goes to infinity, isn't that most physicists would say that that's an unphysical limit, and then you would have to discard it? Usually in physics you say that the relativistic limit is when e squared is much, or e is much greater than the rest mass of a particle, or something like that.
Sorry. What?
So in physics, usually when you come up with infinite energy solutions, you say that they are unphysical.
Yeah.
And relativistically, you say that the high energy limit is when the energy is much greater than the rest mass of the particle.
Yes.
So how is the limit e goes to infinity going to be a physical? Is it going to be physically realizable? Because in physics, when energy goes to infinity, you say that it's non-physical.
So as I see it, let's say, is that when you go, you have these quantum states, which you have some quantum levels. So you have the bottom of the spectrum, which are the fundamental ground state. And then if you look at more and more excited states, so I don't know if you can physically observe it, but if you look at more and more excited states, these are exactly this kind of eigenmodes. So
you're saying that as you go for higher excited states,
it's
not continuous instead of discretized.
No, it's still a discrete spectrum. You have a discrete spectrum, which was what I said there. You have a discrete spectrum, and in this high energy limit, when you look at the more and more excited quantum states, then we will see what kind of phenomenon appear, but it will be related what is called this semi-classical limit. So you should see a connection with classical mechanics in this limit. Okay, so I don't know if it's not really.
I trust that later it makes sense.
Let's see. Let me. Okay. So let me just. I will come probably to this question later, but we will see that there is a kind of relevant thing in this limit. Okay. And so with my second example, okay, so still I can write down this Laplace eigenfunction for the sphere S2. You can write example 2. So this is what we call the spherical harmonic. So an example of solution that I will use later. You can take, say, HL, and so with some CL, with L, which is roughly of order. So this is a normalization constant. Okay, and so this is an example of, in spherical coordinates. This is an example of eigenfunction with L, which is in Z plus. And what you can see on this eigenfunction is that as L, this term is not that relevant because it is of modulus 1, but sine of theta is maximal when theta is pi over 2. So this eigenfunction will be in some sense localized. So here it's theta is equal to pi over 2. Okay. So as L tends to infinity, psi HL are localized near theta is equal to pi over 2. Okay, because far from theta equal pi over 2, this is exponentially small, so the main contribution, the eigenfunction tends to concentrate around this. Okay, so it's just an example that I want to use later, but so this is an example of eigenfunction of the Laplacian. You can check that it works. So the CL is just to have something normalized in L2, but I did not compute it. Okay. So now, if you want, there are several ways where, okay, in these two examples, I had explicit example of eigenfunction. Okay, but you can already feel in the example of the torus that things can be quite complicated because here you have a trigonometric polynomial like this. So here you have the circle of radius 1 over h. Okay, in ZD. Okay, so you can see that an eigenfunction is a superposition of exponential of ikx, and if you have more and more points, more and more lattice points on this circle, this eigenfunction, they can blow up or things like that. So even if you have an explicit expression, it's not clear that you will be able to track all the properties of this eigenfunction. Okay, so I will try to give you a manner to, so you can think of several approaches, okay, to study eigenfunction, but I will study one which comes from quantities that you look at in quantum mechanics. So I want to study this eigenfunction. Okay, so not only in the example but in the general case. Through the probability measure. Nu h. Okay, so you take, if you want to define a probability measure like this, you take a continuous function, you associate the integral over m of a of x. So UH x square times the volume measure. Okay, so this is, I take this natural measure on the manifold. As UH is normalized, when you take A is equal to 1, it gives you a total mass 1. So I want to study this probability measure, and I want to understand what do this probability measure look like. Okay, and so if you want to think about from the scope of quantum mechanics, if you take A, okay, which is not continuous, but which is the characteristic function of some open set, okay, mark. So A is not continuous, okay, I know. Omega open set. What you're looking at is the integral of UH squared times the volume. And this gives you the probability of finding in omega quantum state, particularly in the quantum state UH. Okay, so I want to study this kind of object, and I want to study them in the limit as h goes to 0.
So can I ask
Yes?
quick question? So really this UH depends on finitely many of these CKs.
Yes.
So are you somehow trying to say it should not depend on what the exact value of the CKs are?
So what I will try to look for is to find for general properties of this UH, because here you see that if you take one of a CK which is equal to 1 and all which are equal to 0, all the other ones equal to 0, the eigenfunction is of modulus 1. But if you attribute the same values for each CK, you can create some if you take, for instance, all the CK to be equal to 1 over n, 1 over square root of n, where n is the number of points on this circle, and you take x is equal to 0, you see that the norm of UH is equal to square root of n, and it can tends to infinity. So I want to find some properties which are valid without... It was just to give an example and to see that eigenfunction, even if you have an explicit expression, it's not that simple, okay, to find for...
I mean, the property will depend on which eigenfunction you take in this eigenfunction.
Yes. Yeah, it will depend, but I want to find general properties which are valid for any any eigenfunction, okay? So let me start with a statement which is valid for any eigenfunction in any manifold. And okay. So it's a theorem which goes back to the work of Aronzage. So in 56 and Cord in 56 too. Okay, it tells you that if you take any open set of M, and for any UH, okay, solution to this equation, so to 1, which was minus h squared delta UH is equal to UH, and UH is equal to 1, then if omega is not empty, this implies that this probability measure puts some mass on omega, okay? UH x squared times the volume g of x is strictly positive. Okay, so it means for this eigenfunction, okay, it is clear on my example because it's these are analytic functions, so they can, if you integrate them over some non-empty open set, the mass is positive, but this is a general fact, okay? If you take any smooth, let's say smooth, but you do not need as much assumption. Any smooth manifold, you look at a Laplace eigenfunction, then the integration over some open set is always positive. So it means that you can observe the quantum particle in the set omega for any open set omega. And what I will try to explain to you is how, if can we make, because here you see this is positive, but it depends on the eigenfunction, it depends on the open set, and I will try to find for some uniform properties, so that I will look for some property here, some constant that will be independent of H. So let me be more precise. Okay, so here what we say in general is that you can observe the eigenfunction inside the subset omega. Okay, and a question that I want to address is the following, is how, question, can the lower bound be made uniform in terms of the eigenfunction? Okay, so here this theorem tells you that you can observe the eigenfunction in any open set. Okay, you have positive mass. What I want to try to explain is, can we be sure that there is always the same quantity of mass inside the set omega? Okay, and I want to connect this with this classical dynamics. Okay, so more precisely, define this definition. Let omega be a non-empty open set. Open set of M. Yes?
That theorem says that the probability mass
Yes?
over any open subset is finite, non-zero.
Yeah.
It should be very, very small.
What? Sorry?
I mean, it's one of the tenets of quantum mechanics that the square of the wave function is a probability distribution.
Okay, yes, yes.
So there is no heavy-tailed probability distribution in quantum mechanics. So it should be exponentially small.
In terms of what?
In some subsets, I can find a subset of the domain of the solution.
Yes, so you can see here in this example, if you take this eigenfunction here, if you are away from theta is equal to pi over 2, this is exponentially small.
In discrete spectrum.
Yes.
In discrete spectrum, but I mean, it's larger than zero, but can be can be exponentially small.
In terms of h, you mean? Or the eigen of...
It's written there is the integral over a certain subset of the square of the wave function is larger than zero.
Yes?
It's larger, this is the right side of the equation.
Yes?
Larger than zero, but nevertheless exponentially small. Can be.
Yeah, it can be exponentially small. If you look just at this example here, you take this eigenfunction, you take some open set which is here, the eigenvalue here, this, you compute exactly this quantity in this open set, it's exponentially small as the energy tends to infinity, so as L tends to infinity.
Because I'm thinking probabilistically. There is
Yes.
no zero event. There
Oh,
is
it's
no zero mass event.
There's no contradiction.
What's the exponentially small about the mod square root to the LKS?
I'm not sure I get the question, so maybe I...
The question is, I would like very much to, I would like think
Yes.
of naively, I would like to say that there are events of zero mass. And then this theorem seems to tell that there isn't.
But
It's a theory.
So-
Open subset omega,
No, you said that.
you're gonna find something that is positive, and you don't care whether it's exponentially small or it's just a theorem, just a statement.
No, I understand what theory means. I'm just telling that what does it state is that there are events of zero, there is no event of zero probability. Yes. This
Yeah.
seems very
Yes.
much counterintuitive.
It happens in physics. You, in
But
quantum
it's-
physics,
it's a compact set, so I don't. Okay, so let me just continue. Okay, so let's. Okay, and so what I will say, so if there exists some C omega positive, such that for any UH solution to 1, we have this inequality. Okay, so we have the integral of over omega of UH square times the volume is larger than C omega and is positive. Then we say that the eigenfunctions are observable inside omega. Okay, so then we say that Laplace eigenfunction are observable inside omega. Okay, and so what you have to think is that they are uniformly observable. So it means that for any eigenfunction, even in the large eigenvalue limit, you will find always the same mass inside omega.
Uniformly observable.
Oh, yeah, let's say uniformly observable. Are uniformly. Okay, so this is observability and this is uniform observability. So it means for any and what I claim is that it is sufficient because of this theorem that I stated that it is sufficient to look at the large eigenvalue limit. So what I will do is that I will introduce this set of probability measure, n of delta G, which are the accumulation points of nu h as h goes to 0. Okay, so you take all this, you build all these probability measures starting from any eigenfunction, and you look at all the accumulation point in the limit where h goes to 0. Okay, so this is a subset of probability measure. This is a subset of probability measure on n. On n. And what I claim is that if you can show that you have an uniform mass for any such probability measure inside the set omega, then you have this uniform observability. Okay, so the claim is like this. If there exists some C omega positive, such that for any measure in n delta G, nu of omega is larger than C omega, so which is positive, then you have uniform observability. Okay, so there is a small argument to do, but let me skip this. But what I say is that if you want to prove this kind of uniform observability result, the only thing you need to look at is as the probability measure, as the accumulation point of the probability measure in the large eigenvalue limit. Okay, so I will come back to this example. So to give you example of elements in n of delta G. Okay, so example 1. Okay, so you take UH of x is equal to exponential of ikx over 2 pi d over 2 with norm of k h is equal to 1. Then you have that UH square dx is just equal to dx over 2 pi over d. Okay, so here it does not depend on h. Okay, so it's even simpler than you do not have to take any limit. So you take this example, you have the Lebesgue measure. Okay, another example is you take UH of x. Let's say that we are on the 2 torus. You take so I don't remember exactly the constant, but it's something like this. Sine of x1 exponential of I n x2. Okay, and so you have n squared plus 1 is equal to 1 over h squared. Then you have that if you look at this probability measure, it's just sine square of x1 over maybe there is something, okay, some constant, okay, times some constant square. Okay, so this again, so dx, so this belongs to n delta g. Okay, so in this example, I do not pass to the limit, but you can see that all the objects that I have constructed are absolutely continuous with respect to the Lebesgue measure. And you can see that they put some mass in any open set because these are absolutely, these are analytic functions. Okay, now let me come back to this example. Example 2 on the sphere. Okay, you take the integral over S2 of a of x times this function, so it was so theta phi CL exponential IL phi, so okay, and then it is sine theta d theta d phi. Okay, and you can check. So I will not do it because I'm not that courageous, but you can check that this measure, because away from theta is equal to pi over 2, this is exponentially small, this converge to the integral from 0 to 2 pi of a pi over 2 phi d phi over 2 pi. Okay, so it means that the limit measure, it is the measure along the equator. Okay, so here you have that.
L goes to infinity.
Yes. L goes to infinity. Thank you. Okay, so here, if you take a sphere with this sequence of eigenfunction, we have delta gamma, which is the Lebesgue measure along the equator. Okay, so which is just defined like this. And you have delta gamma belongs to n of delta g. Okay, so now you can see on this example that you have constructed something which is singular. Okay, before I had only absolutely continuous measure, but now you have a measure which is carried by some curve. Okay, and what you can already observe is that if you have uniform observability on S2, then this implies, because you see, here I did this for the equator, but this is a choice of coordinates, but I can do this for any closed geodesic, okay? So it means that uniform observability on omega implies that every closed geodesic should cross omega.
What do you mean this? This includes unity.
Here, you see, I chose some eigenfunction, and I chose my...
There's only one. I mean, for every L, there's only one.
So there is only one, but you can see that if I fix another big circle by a spherical symmetry, okay, I will be able to choose, I will put my system of coordinate of spherical coordinates adapted to this big circle, and I will construct the an eigenfunction concentrating on this closed geodesic.
I don't understand. I this is one dimensional?
No. The eigenspace, sorry, I did not say that. So the eigenspace in that example have dimension 2L plus 1. Okay, so we have many eigenfunctions, which are the spherical harmonics.
But where's the parameter that takes 2L plus 1 values?
So here, it was only one example of eigenfunction. You have other example of eigenfunction. You have to just, you have to take the expression of the Laplacian in spherical coordinates, and you will find it will amount to solve certain ordinary differential equation like Bessel or I don't.
Thank you.
Okay, but it's not the only. It's just one example among a family of examples, but it's not the only example of eigenfunction. Okay, but this example is just illustrate that you can do this for. If you want to observe your eigenfunction inside omega, you have to be sure that every closed geodesic will encounter omega. But you see on the torus, we did not see this condition. Okay, it seems that they. Okay, but again, it's only two examples. Yes.
Gamma, what's that gamma? Sorry, I confused it. You took some
The equator, gamma. Sorry. And gamma, it will be later on, it will be a closed geodesic. Okay, but every closed geodesic gamma should encounter. Sorry, thank you.
So we're still talking about the wrong metric on this thing, right?
Yes, I'm still working for a moment. In my example, it's the Euclidean metric on the torus and the round metric
So there is no such omega.
that encounter all the closed.
Yeah.
Yes, you can take omega, which is just all the hemisphere plus some, you take omega, you just go beyond a little bit, you just, and then you will have that every closed geodesic will encounter omega. Yes?
Can you please give a physical idea of this meaning of the claim about uniform observability? What can this mean physically?
Let's say that I'm not sure that it just.
H
I'm-
going to zero
Yes.
is kind of classical limit, right?
Yes, semi-classical. Yeah. Here I'm just using this. For a moment, it's just some abstract definition, okay? And I'm just what I want to show in this course is to show that depending on the fact that the dynamics is integrable or chaotic, you will have different features. And here I just introduce this property, which just means that I can observe eigenfunction in any place uniformly. And later on, what I want to show you is that on this simple property, you can see that for integrable system and chaotic system, the picture will be quite different, okay? But I'm just introducing this. I'm not sure I have a good answer to this, sorry.
You can say you're looking for what are the classically forbidden regions, which would be the complementary of this. The regions where classically the particles doesn't go is the complement of this.
But here the
Yes.
particle can go anywhere.
Well, yes.
There's no classically forbidden in terms of energy.
It's not like when you have psi square plus v. Let's say it's just a mathematical definition that I'm using, but
I mean, there
Okay.
is a consequence in terms of observability. I mean, observability inequality in terms of time evolution.
yeah, okay, there is, but I don't want to enter. Okay, there is this kind of definition where it comes from is from in math. People use this kind of terminology in what is called control theory, and when you have this kind of equality, it means that if you take two quantum states and you want to go from one quantum state to another, okay, by the Schrödinger evolution, you can go from this quantum state to the other one just by acting on the set omega. Okay, so you have a problem with constraint. You have U1, U2, two quantum states, and you want to see if you can evolve the system from U1 to U2 just by acting on the set omega. So this is this is what people say that it's a control problem. Okay, you want to control the problem to go from any U1 and U2, and this is the kind of quantity that appears. But I prefer not to enter this. But okay. Okay, so now, for a moment, everything was on the configuration space on M, but I want to use classical dynamics, so I want to lift everything on T star M. Okay, so I don't know which part it is, it's part 2. I want to lift the measure UH. And the goal is to exploit the classical dynamics. Okay, so if you want, I have T star of M, which is the set of points x and xi, where x is the position and xi is the impulsion, with a xi, which is an element of, so the dual to Tx of M. And here I have M. So it means that to X psi, I associate X, so the projection. So I have a measure nu H here, nu H a measure on M. And here, what I want to do is to lift mu H in a canonical way. So lift, a canonical is not a good word, but a lift on T star of M of mu H. Okay, so I have defined an object on M, and what I want to do now is to define an object on T star of M starting from this measure. Okay, and so now the difficulty starts. So to do this, I will introduce what are called pseudo-differential operators. So it will be like a crash introduction to this notion.
Will it be a probability?
What?
Will it be a probability?
No. No. I will lift a nu H into a distribution, and I will explain this, but it will not be a probability measure. It can be made, there is a way to make it a probability measure, but as I will present it, because there are several ways to lift this measure, but the way I will present it, it will not be a measure improvement. Okay, so so crash introduction. To pseudo-differential operators. Okay, so the point is that I want to associate to a smooth function an operator. Okay, so this is what people call usually a quantization procedure. You associate to any smooth function an operator acting on L2 of M. So let me start with RD, just to give you a picture. So let me write the definition. So you take a compact, so R2D, so this is T equal T star of RD, U, which is compactly supported in RD. And so now I want to build from A an operator acting on L2, and so I will explain what is the action of this operator on this function U. Okay, so let me write the definition. Okay, so there are several choices, but I will explain that in the end, all these choices are equivalent for the problem I want to look at. Okay, so. Okay, so it is defined like this. So I just write the definition, and then I will try to explain to you what are the properties of this object. Okay, so to a smooth function, I associate an operator that acts on smooth function, and it is defined like this. So you take exponential of IH x minus y xi, ax plus y over 2 xi uy dy dxi. Okay, so just to see on two example, take A, okay, so I know that this is not a smooth, compactly supported function, okay, but if you take this definition with x1, you see that you have x1 plus y1 over 2 uy exponential of ih x minus y xi dy dxi R2D. Okay, so what you're doing, so x1, okay, you can put it out the integral. Okay, so the term in x1, what you are doing is you take the Fourier transform, then you take the inverse Fourier transform, and so in the end, it gives you u. Now you take y1 times u of y, you apply the Fourier transform, then the inverse Fourier transform, then in the end, it gives you y1 times uy. So this is equal to x1 u of x. Okay, so when you define things like this, it is just the multiplication operator by x1. Okay. So another example is you take a of x xi to be equal to xi1. So what you're doing is if this is xi1, you have xi1 here, you have u of y, you take the Fourier transform, you multiply by xi1, then you make the inverse Fourier transform, and you know that multiplying by xi1, the Fourier transform is the same as differentiating the function. So up h of a u is equal to h over I dxy u. Okay, so this is called a pseudo differential operator. Okay, pseudo differential operator. Okay, you can see that when you have because of this kind of rules here, when you have a polynomial in x and xi, it just gives you some differential operator. But here I'm using more general function, so it gives you a more general operator. Okay, so. And what I claim is that on a compact manifold, you can do the same. On a compact manifold, you can also construct some quantization procedure. Okay, so you take a smooth, compactly supported function, and you associate some operator of h. Okay, so this is a bounded operator on L2. Okay, so this is a quantization procedure. And rather than giving you all the technical construction, what I will give you is the rules of the game. Okay, so what are the rules you can use? How you can play with this? Okay, you have a smooth function, you associate an operator, and I will explain what you are authorized to do, and then I refer you to the lecture notes where there are more details. Okay. Okay, so first of all, what you have is that you can do more general function than a compactly supported function. Okay, so remark, it still makes sense for more general function. Okay, what is important is that you have is that the growth with respect to psi is not too bad. Okay, so is that, let's say you have, is there exists some m such that for all alpha and beta, this is less than c alpha beta 1 plus psi m minus beta, where beta is just the sum over the beta j. Okay. So this is a multi-index. So if you look in local coordinates, what is important is that you do not grow too fast with respect to psi. Okay, so in particular, you can a of x, so which is independent of psi, okay, a function of x is authorized. Okay, you can quantize this as I did on RD. If you take a of x psi is equal to psi squared over 2 is also authorized, okay, and it will give you minus h squared times the Laplacian. Okay, so now what we are allowed to do, okay? So the rules. Yes?
What is the thing that breaks down if this inequality is not fulfilled?
Oh, no, it's not that important. It's just I take, you have to have enough derivative to perform some stationary phase argument. But you can work if there are, with my presentation, I use what is called the Weil quantization. Okay, so at some point you need to have a few derivatives, but you can use other choice of quantization, and I think Frédéric will use this, like Bargmann quantization, and you can use continuous function, it will work, okay? But I just take C infinity for safety reason, but it's just not that.
Can you say, I'm not sure I understand this reflection, but exactly is delta psi to the beta? And psi is already a
Delta psi, it's just a partial derivative. You are.
Psi is a multi-index, right?
Psi is no, beta is a multi-index, okay, so it belongs to n to z plus d. X is our local coordinates x1, xd in a small chart, okay, and psi are just the local coordinates in the tx star of m. Okay, I'm just, if you think of RD, I'm just
Delta psi 1 to the beta 1, delta psi 2 to the beta 2.
yes, sorry. Okay, so this is dx1 to the alpha 1, dxd to the alpha d. Okay. Yes?
So the composition of the right, the manifold, is adapted to the metric?
No, it's not really adapted to anything for a moment. It's just the way I do it is just that I use some, let's say, partition of unity and use this local image and.
So this means that I can quantize any function quadratic momentum?
Yes. But it's not a canonical choice. It's just there is a lot of choice of charts and so on. But okay, so rules of the game. Okay, so rules number 1 is that if you take a function which does not depend on psi, op h of a u is equal to a times u, okay, like before. Okay, So rules number 2 is that this is a bounded operator. Okay, so if A is compactly supported, okay, let's say, up H of A from L2 to L2 is bounded, and this is less than some constant, some universal constant that depends only on M and on the choice of quantization. Something like this, okay? H alpha over 2 d alpha A infinity. Okay, so it means that if your function have bounded derivative, then you have a bounded operator acting on L2. And so this is less than Cm norm of A infinity plus big O of H to the 1 half. Okay, so it means that as H goes to 0, which is what I have in mind in the future, is that the norm of this operator is controlled by the norm of A, the L infinity norm of A. Okay, so the other important thing is that when you multiply two such operators, you have that up H of A, up H of B. So here it's the sum over the multi-index, the other to some constant dm. So you have to take a center number of derivatives. Okay, so there exists some.
Not the dimension.
No, it's not the dimension. It depends on the dimension and the manifold, but just. So this is up H of AB plus big O. Okay, so it means that if you make the product of two pseudo-differential operators, it's the same as taking up H of AB plus some term which is asymptotically small. Okay. Okay, again for C, A, compactly supported T star, and B nice enough. Okay. Okay, so to be sure that, and so the most important thing for me, they are all important, but is this one, is that you take a smooth function, it's a plus some big O, so it means that if you, these are operator, and if you view this as an operator from L2 to L2, this is bounded by some constant time H. If you want, I'm writing that up H of A, up H of B, minus up H of AB as an operator from L2 to L2 is less than a constant time H. I'm saying that if I compare these two operators, the product of this one with this one and this operator, in the limit where H goes to 0, the norm of these two operators are comparable. So this just means that I view all these objects as operators acting from L2 to L2, and the norm is of order H. Okay, and so this is the Egorov theorem. Okay, and it tells you this. So here what you're doing is you take the operator and you conjugate by the quantum evolution, which is exponential of ITH delta over 2. And this is basically the same as up H composed with a flow that I will define, plus. And so here you have the evolution of the operator under the quantum evolution. So this is the Schrödinger evolution. Schrödinger evolution. And phi t is the geodesic flow.
And the O is still in norm.
So O is still in norm, yes, sorry. L2 from L2, H. Okay. Where phi t goes from T star of M to T star of M is the Hamiltonian flow associated with H of x psi is equal to psi square over 2. Okay, so example. What is this? Still on the torus, Tn. We have a phi t of x psi is x plus t psi. Okay, so what is it? It's just you have a torus. You take a point x and a direction psi, and you just move along straight line. Okay, it's just a straight line on the torus, and because you have to identify this with this, you just go around. Okay, so and more generally, when you have so this is what is called the geodesic flow. Okay, so when you have a metric, you can define some flow on T star of M, and this flow is connected with the Schrödinger evolution. So you see that in the limit where h goes to 0, which is the limit I'm interested in, you have a connection between this quantum evolution and this classical evolution. So it means that it's the same as making evolve the operator op h of A by these unitary operators as making this function evolves by the geodesic flow up to some error term. Yes?
Is it uniform T? Or
Okay, so this is uniform in T if you stay in a compact interval. Okay, so okay, remark. The remainder is uniform for T in a fixed compact interval 0 big T. Okay, so it means if you want to go to time that depends on h, it will not be true anymore, or at least you have to be careful. Okay, so, and the last rule, so it was DE, is that if A is positive, then, and compactly supported, for all U of H of A, so in L2, U is almost positive. Okay, so it means that for a positive function, almost give rise to a positive operator, okay, up to some error. Okay, so it's a lot of rules, okay? U square. Thank you. And what I will try to do now in the last minutes of this first session is to explain to you how to apply them to see how it works. Okay, so I will just apply, I will keep them on the board as much as I can, and I will apply them. Okay, and I remind you that what I wanted to do is to lift this measure, and I want to show you how I can lift this measure using this procedure. Okay, so what I do is that I use this procedure to define mu h, which takes a compactly supported function and gives you op h of a UH in L2, where minus h square delta UH is equal to UH, and UH. Okay, so I define this quantity, which is, when you are on RD, is called the Wigner distribution. Enfin, it's not, it's related to this Wigner distribution. Okay, so I define this, and let me explain to you why, using all this, it is related to the object I have introduced before. Okay, so this is a distribution on T star of n. Okay.
So you say it does not depend on UH?
You say that it doesn't. No, it depends on UH. So for each UH, defined for. I fix a sequence. I fix some Laplace eigenfunction. And I just define using op h of a new object. Okay. Before I had UH, before I had nu h of a was the integral over m of a UH squared d vol g. So now I'm defining something slightly more general. It means that for any compactly supported function on T star of m, I define some distribution associated to the UH. So it's the same thing as before, except that now I'm working on this cotangent space on T star of. So for each UH, I define a quantity, and this is. Okay, so.
Can you say on RD, this is exactly the Wigner function? Or
Yes. If you take this quantization here, this Weil quantization, you find the Wigner distribution. Okay. Okay, so what I have is that because of B, this rule number 2 here, you have that this is a bounded mu h is a bounded sequence of distribution. Okay. If you take a sequence of UH, okay, solutions to 1. Okay, what is important here is that it is normalized, but so if you take a sequence of normalized UH, you have a bounded sequence of distribution, and so you can extract a converging subsequence. And this is what I will call M of delta G is the set of accumulation points of mu h as h goes to 0. Okay, and this is what I will call in the set of semi-classical measures. Okay, so semi-classical because they are taken as the limit as h goes to 0 of a sequence of eigenfunction, and measure will be justified after the break. Okay, okay, so it is a good time to stop. Okay, but, sorry for this last 15 minutes, but so what I have done to summarize is that I started from this Laplace eigenfunction. I constructed this probability measure nu h, and in this last 15 minutes, I have introduced some manner to associate to function on T star of m operators, and this allows me to define a distribution on T star of m. And as I did before, here I have extracted converging subsequences, and now I did the same with the mu h. And after the break, I will tell you what are the properties of the elements inside this set using these rules. Okay. Okay, so I stop here.
So these are measures?
After the break, I said. I did not. I wrote measure, but I will justify. I will.